Now we will turn our attention towards what was the trend of historiography, a level of historiography in medieval India. Up to early medieval, we have seen, surveyed. As I was saying that when Ibn Khaldun is writing, he is saying that a state has a nature of rent exacting state, and that was the case which Francois Bernier in mid 17th century, when he is visiting India, he also visited the Ottoman Empire. So he compared all the three, and he found that the Ottoman state and the Mughal state both are rent exacting states. In fact, exploitative states. Now, the question arises that so far medieval India is concerned, we start tracing our, now there is a debate. Some people say early medieval India will start from mid 7th century AD. The others say that no, the classic period starts from 1206 after the establishment of the Delhi Sultans. Meanwhile, we have surveyed, what kind of historical literature was being generated in India. Kalhan was there, outstanding example of mid 12th century, and then we had Harshcharitra and others. Purana literature is there, so there was some semblance of historical historical consciousness coming into the into the reckoning. Now, when we turn our attention to medieval India proper, what we find is that Khaldun belonged to the Maghrib and had practically no influence on the writing of history on India, which is very evident. We will discuss that. Medieval Indian historiography was influenced by Arab tradition or Arabic tradition, but more specifically, historians of India were heirs to that kind of Islamic history which developed in Persia. Traditionally, the first historical work to have been written in Persia was Barani's translation of Tarikh-e-Tabri. It is an abridgment of Tabri's original Tarikh and was written around 975 AD, within 55 years of Tabri's death, at the Samanid court in Central Asia, where the language of the court was Persian. This is the time when the entire Central Asia is having the lingua franca is Persian. So this is also known as Persianite world. As recently Herbert Eaton has titled his book like that. So this was under Persian, heavily under the influence of Persian literature and language, and script as well. So language of the court was Persian and that of the people was Turkish. People in general were Turkish speaking people. And on this point, I have already discussed with you the present debate going on. Barani dropped the year by year system of arrangement and thereby perhaps unconsciously liberated Persian historiography from the straitjacket of chronological history. Another major influence on medieval Indian historiography was that of Firdausi's Shahnama, the classic. It is not yet certain what sources besides Barani did Firdausi have. Was he relying on oral traditions alone, or did he have some access to written records as well? His Shahnama made pre-Muslim Persian tradition a part of the educated Muslims' cultural inheritance, refreshingly so. The scope of history was made larger than Islamic history, and a belief gained ground that the society under Persian monarchy was an ideal society. In style, the Persian historiography gave up the Isnad system of Tabri, perhaps because of the development of a stronger written tradition among the Persians than prevailed among the Arabs. In India, the first major historical work to have been written in Persian was Minhaj-us Siraj's Tabqat-e-Nasiri, written around 1258 AD at Delhi. It is a universal history, but greatly emphasizes the history of the kingdom of Ur and the Sultanate of India till his own times. A remarkable thing about this book is a section on the biographies of the influential nobles of Iltutmish's reign. Normally, such biographies are not found in dynastic histories. Minhaj has a very accurate knowledge of the Mongols. It is very evident in the text. He does not seem to have a philosophy of history. There are no large interpretations, but these can be derived by a discernful reading of his narration. After Minhaj, it is Barani, Ziauddin Barani, who was a resident of Bulandshahr, which was at that time known as Baran. Barani breaks fresh grounds in the historiography of India on various counts. We will be discussing them. He was born about 1285 AD, when that gentleman had expired. He belonged both sides to a medium ranking aristocratic family. He was not from the real aristocrat family, which produced educated scholars called Danishmands, whose members usually sought government appointments in the capacities as judicial officers or court administrators, etc. His father was a court official of a Turkish noble of Balban, not of Balban, Turkish noble of Balban. His uncle Alaul Mulk had positions during the reign of Alauddin Khalji. Barani could manage no job for himself until the reign of Muhammad bin Tughlaq, who appointed him as his Muqarrab, that is companion. His duties and functions as a Muqarrab are not very clearly known to us. Apparently, he was assigned with the task of dealing with the scholars and of discussing matters of theological importance with Muhammad Tughlaq. During the reign of Firoz Tughlaq, he fell on bad times, he lost his job, he was even imprisoned for some time. He died an embittered man, toothless, ill and begging for his living. During these embittered days, he took to writing and wrote a large number of books and tracts. None of that bitterness, however, hampers his analysis of Delhi Sultanate, rather of all despotic states. This is a remarkable thing. He is maintaining neutrality with his subject. Barani wrote a large number of books like Tarikh-e-Alam Baraika, Shifa-e-Naat Muhammadi, Fatwa-e Jahandari, and there are a host of others, and the most important of his books, however, was Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi. Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi is doubtless a significant advance in Indian Islamic historiography, though it suffers from certain number of weaknesses even. Even then, it is outstanding work. Eliot and Dawson charges him with being very reckless about dates. Unlike Minhaj, though Barani saw his history as a continuation of his book, he does not describe events in chronological order. And whereas Minhaj is very meticulous about dates, Barani is certainly not. Barani also does not seem to care much about battles and campaigns. Important campaigns do not figure in his Tarikh. Those that find reference are described in no details and most often with disinterest, unless of course these were of direct relevance to his analysis of the Delhi Sultanate, the larger scheme. His Tarikh is not a chronicle but a history in what Dawson describes as the European sense, or in what we would now describe as the modern sense. History for him is neither a chronological description of events, nor a description of dynasts or dynasties. He has a philosophy of history which he applies fairly consistently to his analysis of the Delhi Sultanate as a whole. Peter Hardy, a very important modern historian, he criticizes Barani for viewing history as a part of Muslim theology. He thinks that his orientation is theocratic, and for looking at past as a commentary on the present being a vehicle of God's revelations. This view appears mistaken. Barani no place describes history as a branch of theology. He is very clear about it. This view appears mistaken. Barani at no place describes history as a branch of theology. In fact, his historical narrative allows no concession to fate or God in determining the course of events, except in a very restricted manner. Like, when he is discussing Alauddin Khalji's uncle's death, he says that this is providential, but normally you will not find it. It is significant to note that he seeks a commendation of history not from the Quran or the Hadith, but from the sayings of pre-Muslim Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Persian sages like Buzurji Meher, considered to be a minister of Noshirwan. This is a remarkable departure. It is perhaps a misunderstanding of the term Ibrat by Barani that has led historians to commit the error of describing Barani's Tariq as a part of theology. This word does occur in the Quran, but in common Muslim parlance, it had lost all Quranic connotation or nuances. By the time of Barani, it was used to mean warnings from previous lapses or experiences of human beings, largely in the worldly affairs. Even now, in our day-to-day talk, we do say that learn this lesson, this is an ibrat for you. If somebody has committed some mistake and he is, he gets some punishment for that, then people say that this is an ibrat for you and for others. It's a common, common understanding. So, Barani's ibrat refers to those happening of the past that lead to the collapse and disintegration of power, wealth and status of the high-born. He divides the society into high-born and low-born. It therefore relates to the perpetual maintenance of the superordinate position of the high-born and the preservation of hierarchy in the society. If Barani's motive of writing history is to draw ibrat, and if this is his concept of ibrat, then what is his audience? His audience is the great men of state and faith. He writes himself, and that's why I call it within quotes. And who are the representing of these? Who are representing this court and also the state and faith? The king, the nobility, and their well-wishers, the aristocrats. History, insofar as its lessons are concerned, is a branch of learning in which ordinary people have nothing to do. This is according to Barani. Why should history be made to draw lessons for the ruling class then? This, he says, is essential not just for the sake of ruling class, but for the preservation of a stable, ideal society wherein would exist perfect hierarchy, that is to say, everyone's status would be well defined according to his birth, something akin to caste system, but he is not saying that. This concept is not derived from any Hindu influence of caste, but was deep rooted in the Islamic system. How? We will see that. This particular hankering after status in Islamic societies is, in fact, as old as Islam itself. It is for this reason that Muslims believe that pre-Muslim Persian Empire to be an ideal state, wherein existed a model hierarchical state governed by the society, which governed society. Barani also for this reason holds the Persian Empire to be an ideal state. This was a state, laudingly he says, where everything went by status. High posts were not given on the criteria of talent and loyalty, but on the basis of status and birth. That's why he will be lamenting this when Muhammad Tughlaq and others will be practicing just the reverse. How should then the rulers and the ruling class conduct themselves to ensure, in the first place, they should patronize the orthodox religious elements of the society, because that would prevent the heterodox elements from coming to the fore. He rejects heterodoxy not on any religious grounds, but because it is a destabilizing doctrine. Theology, in contrast, is a safe discipline for the rulers and the nobility. He points out that many of the problems of Muhammad Tughlaq were a result of the growth of heterodoxy. He then goes on to examine the question of the implementation of Sharia. The rulers, he says, should realize that one cannot govern the state the same way as the pious caliphs. Implicitly, thus he is referring to the non-tractability of Shariat in the changing circumstances of India. Times have changed in a manner so as to render the laws of Sharia obsolete. He is therefore against the total information of Shariat in the interest of the nobility. If Sharia should not follow, what is it that they actually should do to ensure their rule in perpetuity? Barani fails to answer this question, though it is to investigate an answer to this question that he had set out to write the Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi. In seeking an answer, he appears confronted with a host of dilemma and contradictions which extend from personal characters to historical causation. It is in bringing out these contradictions so very lucidly that the real value of Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi lies. He sees in the Delhi Sultanate the development of two major phenomena. One is the growth of Uls al-Umri, and that is absolute despotic sovereignty. And this growth of absolute sovereignty, he says, leads to two processes. One is that rulers tend to become tyrants and cruel. Here he is not concerned with the attitude towards the common people, but towards the nobility. Secondly, owing to the growth of power, enlargement of power, they begin to amass immense wealth in their hands. So it is often held on what Barani says about Balban, that he believed in the divine origins of kingship. This appears totally mistaken. Why? Because he refers to Jalaluddin Khalji's frustration on ascending the throne because he could see no divine inspiration, no supernatural power coming to him on assuming the crown. He also approvingly quotes his court officers saying that the sovereignty has nothing to do with the god. It is an exercise of power and authority and a function of terror and fear aroused among the nobility. The second development in the Delhi Sultanate, according to Barani, is in the rise of low-born elements in the nobility. And he had a particular bias against them. As the nobility obtains more and more wealth, power as well, he says they become less and less loyal and efficient. They therefore get replaced by men of loyalty and efficiency who naturally come from the low-born categories. As the state dispenses with the criterion of birth and replaces it by the criteria of efficiency and loyalty, it heralds the influx of low-born elements who, after first overthrowing the older nobles, usurp the crown. A similar development could also occur if the sovereign is weak. So, his weakness would encourage the plebeians to usurp the political power. Here it must be emphasized that when Barani speaks of highborn and lowborn, he refers to birth frozen in time. Balban was a highborn according to Barani, but he was originally a purchased slave. Both these developments, which is the rise of absolute monarchy and the plebeianization of nobility, destabilizes the state and heralds its ultimate decline. A word about Barani's attitude towards Hindus should be said at the end. He is not at all concerned about the common people. That includes both the Hindus and the Muslims. When he refers to Hindus, he is in fact referring to Hindu aristocracy. It is a generic term. Although indeed a communalist has witnessed the sadistic pleasure he takes in Alauddin's harsh measures against the Hindu Chaudhris and Muqaddams, he also a hardcore realist. Thus, he find him praising Firoz Shah when the latter compromised with the Khus and Muqaddams and Chaudhuris. Barani had no successor. Successive historians, though aware of his writings, do not even marginally address themselves to questions which were central to Barani. While insistence on chronology and details about the campaigns and expeditions receive a new vigor, the perspective to history provided by Barani as a science seeking to analyze the long-term dynamics of societies gets lost sight of. Outside India, Persian historiography continued to develop in contrast to our India. There are two major traditions of Persian historiography during this period which were to have the influence of the Mughal historiography in India later on. One tradition was set by Wassaf's Tarikh-e-Wassaf, written in the first half of the 14th century for the Mongol rulers of Iran, Abu Said. Departing from the existing historical tradition of writing simple and easy to understand prose, Wassaf introduced a highly ornate style of writing and further embellished his style by philosophical digressions. So, an attempt of this kind was made in the 14th century by Amir Khusrau in his Khazana-ul-Futuh, but whereas Khazana-ul-Futuh was more like a qasida written in prose, qasida is in praise of something. Wassaf's Tarikh was essentially a historical work. His style was to have considerable influence on Abul Fazl. The second major Iranian tradition was established by Yazdi's Zafarnama, written in the early 15th century. In this chronicle, Yazdi sets out the essential features for the official chronicles written in India in the 16th and 17th centuries. He wrote a fairly courtly language. The prose is by no means simple, but lacks the style and embellishment of Wassaf. He also combines geography with history so that if Timur invades an area, Yazdi takes care to furnish us with his geography. His chronicle has a very useful section on the geography of Kashmir, Wassaf. Though stylistic, he refrained from indulging in the play of words or philosophical discourses.